Morning, everybody. Welcome to part three, I guess, on the Prestige Series 7000. Um, Part one was the 10 inches. Part two, first half of the first 100. So we're going to cover 7050 through 7100. Like Blue Note, the second half of the first 100 LPs is really prestigious stuff. Blue Note really hits its stride, in the 1530s and 40s, and by the time they're in those 1560s, 70s, and 80s, it's just title after title of just knockout, crazy good hard bop. And again, Prestige isn't so limited to one sound. They're going to be dabbling in post bop, modern, some hard bop, uh, some elements of even like third stream kind of modernity. They really mix it up with a lot of different sounds because there is no clear mission statement at Prestige really at any point aside from let's hope this makes some money. And money was obviously far more of a determining factor at Prestige in a lot of ways, even though a lot of it just feels very slapped together at the same time. But there's a looseness and a realness to a lot of this Prestige jazz that you can't escape. Uh, Jazz doesn't need to be rehearsed. It adds a certain element, adds a certain spiritual unity and a sense of communion. And we could probably all be kind of emoting from a similar place, which is what I think Blue Note achieves. But part of what makes jazz great, part of what makes the blues great, is I could show up in a bar in Milwaukee, not know anybody there, get on stage, and we could speak that language together. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be rehearsal for it to be great jazz. It just kind of changes, I think, its spiritual direction, its undertones. You might have two guys talk about women and another guy talking about depression, another guy talking about depression, So it's that's the biggest impact is you just kind of change the undercurrent when you don't have that rehearsal time. I think I've stated that before, so I don't need to go any deeper on that. But again, this second half of the 7000 series, which is going to be 57, 58, it's just crazy good stuff. And towards the end of this sequence, new jazz is going to start showing up. And I'll probably do a special episode on that, probably on the next episode. I'm a little disappointed by the viewership on these Prestige. Obviously, those of you who are watching it, my disappointment's not with you. But if the Blue Note sequence was successful and they were all getting 1,200, 1,500, 1,500 views, these Prestiges are getting 500, 600 views, which is a big difference. Which A, shows you some of the power behind the marketing at Blue Note. People are just searching and Googling Blue Note like it's the only part of the jazz canon. And it shows you how much work we have to do to spread the knowledge and the passion and the love for jazz beyond what's being marketed by Tone Poet, beyond what's being marketed by Columbia, beyond what's being spread by most of the YouTube channels. There's so much more jazz than what is available today. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, a lot of what's coming up with these record store days stuff is inferior, unimportant stuff. And I'm not going to sit here championing it. I'm not going to sit here shilling like I'm getting kickbacks from this stuff because a lot of it doesn't belong in the canon. It wasn't released for a reason. Some of it's good, some of it's great, but I don't think any of it belongs in your collection until you have the lion's share of that artist material. The new Bill Evans coming on. If you don't have all Bill Evans' Riverside stuff and most of his verse stuff, you really got no business buying some outtakes, some scraps, a live thing that was, it's jazz, so it's always going to have some merit and some value. But the marketing behind it's going to fool you and trick you into buying stuff that has a limited place. And I've talked to many record store owners over the years about this. Record store day for some record stores is an absolute burden. And it actually doesn't hold the benefit for a lot of the actual record stores owners that you would think. It brings a lot of people in just for those 1 or 2 days, Black Friday for the spring sale. A lot of people come in, buy that stuff, and then resell it online for 5 times the amount. The record stores are forbidden from doing that themselves, or else they won't get titles. So they're basically being used as distributing middlemen and getting paid very next to nothing. The store itself that day is a shit show. It's not really bringing a lot of people in other days of the year. I've talked to a lot of record owners that hated it, just can't, and they think it's a money losing venture. because you have to wrap up a lot of your inventory and money in titles that you're not sure are going to even sell. And I know a lot of these record stores, you go in there 5 months after record store day and they have 3 bins full of stuff that didn't sell on record store day. And the stuff that's great sold that day. But a lot of that stuff will just sit there, and they'll mark it down. They'll mark it down below cost eventually. And that's not doing anybody any favors. And so I just wish we get back to a place where people would dig and do a little more research about what they're buying and what they're collecting and what they're looking for on vinyl than just simply this wave of media saying, oh, this is a new release for Record Store Day by so-and-so. It's a must-have. And a lot of them just simply aren't. You know, speaking of jazz in particular, I'm not too familiar with a lot of the rock and roll stuff and hip-hop stuff. I've seen some of it. Some of it's kind of cool. And some of the jazz stuff is cool. It's just, it's out of balance. That's the issue, you know. I don't have a problem with anybody buying Record Store Day stuff. I'm not trying to say that. But what I'm saying is if this Prestige series is getting half the views or less than the Blue Note series, someone's not amplifying jazz history properly. There's a lot of voices out there amplifying just certain things, and it's obvious that they have money or a stake in that. You know, Prestige is right there with Blue Note in terms of the same artists, the same recording studios, the same distribution channels. Riverside, Blue Note, and New York, and Blue Note and Prestige in New York were sister labels in some contexts. And if you were a bass player or drummer, you often recorded for all 3 in the same week. Rudy Van Gelder was recording all 3 of them at his studio. And Savoy, too. There's this huge part of the story that's just being overlooked. And I fear so much of it is new collectors who are just watching YouTube and watching so many of the voices out there who are selling products versus just telling the story. And I just got to say it because, like I seen a couple articles the other day about Record Store Day for record store owners. And this wasn't even local guys. This was guys around the country talking about it. It's not the gift horse that so many see it as. For a lot of them, it is an albatross. And I think if you're a bigger store and you can get the titles you want and you can afford the inventory over costs, it's probably a pretty good thing for a lot of those guys. But for some of the smaller stores, and you got people calling in saying, oh, can you get me this? Can you get me that? A lot of times the little stores don't even get 1 copy, or they have 2 copies to fight between 10 people. It's, like I said, it's a lot of stress and a lot of work for a lot of record store owners that doesn't really benefit them in many ways at all. It is bringing some new people to vinyl, but how many of those people stay with it? That's a question I can't answer. I certainly know that when I go into a lot of my local record stores, a lot of that Target and Walmart and you know, mass-produced vinyl that's coming out again is sitting in their used pretty quickly. You know, and that tells you something, that A, a lot of this stuff is being sold, but B, I think a lot of these people are, you know, they buy into the trend for 6 months or a year, and they're like, I'm going to snowboard instead. And I think one of the things I'm going to add to my coffee shop here, when we get that going this spring, is bring your vinyl day. You know, bring a couple records in on a Saturday afternoon, and I'll let you play them. We'll have a sign-up sheet. We'll see how that goes. But, of course, there's limits to it. I don't want you playing Dio during morning coffee hour rush. And I'm okay with the last in line. You know, I mean, I was a Dio guy as a kid, but it's not for the coffee shop. You got to be a little bit, you know, sensible. But there'll be a lot of space to play fun stuff, especially during slow times and stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But we're going to jump into the second part of the Prestige sequence, 70, 50, and there's some just knockout stuff, guys, so enjoy this. Okay, so here we are with Billy Taylor once again. And again, Billy Taylor is such a great player, really comfortable in any format. That's a great Prestige album cover right there. It really speaks on the leading cutting edge of jazz, modernism, and graphic design for their album covers. And we're probably 1956 here, 57 perhaps. Benny Green blows his horn. And again, Benny Green was on Blue Note. He was on a lot of different labels. He's a great trombone player who isn't going to be pushing bebop and hard bop. He's going to be pushing more traditional sounds and modern sounds and sweet swinging sounds. Here's some more Monkuses with Rollins, 7053. And again, this was recorded from 10 inches and pushed onto the LP format. This is Miles Davis Blue Haze, which is an example of a record I had on OJC for a long time. But then I found that original for a decent price, and I added it to my collection. It's just fun to have the old stock and the old labels and logos. I'm not going to break an arm or a leg to buy them, but if they come into my lap for a good price, I certainly will look at it. Clifford Brown Memorial. Again, this is stuff that was recorded in the early 50s. He passes in 56, so he's definitely passed on by this point. And the name Memorial would tell you that, but it's just prestige saying, oh, he passed? Let's find what we have in the vaults and capitalize on. If I remember, this stuff's recorded in Sweden or something. It is, yep. James Moody. Again, he's had a couple big R&B hits in the late 40s, early 50s with Moody's Mood, and Prestige signed him up. And he does a pretty great string of records here, playing the saxophone. He dabbles on the flute. And then he goes to Argo, and he makes some great records at Argo. This is Django by the Modern Jazz Quartet. And this is something that Blue Note probably wouldn't have recorded. It's, MJQ at this point is starting to deviate towards that third stream and adding composition and real elements of classical music overlaid. And they haven't really quite got there yet. Like, they're going to get there on Atlantic. When they start doing the Night in Venice and the comedy, all that type of stuff, they really push that envelope even further. Again, there's an original pressing of that now. Moving Out, Thelonious Monk and Kenny Dorham with Sonny Rollins. And if memory serves, this is also from 54, 55, I think. Yeah, 54. I'm all hopes on some of this. You need to give that one a listen. I haven't heard that one in a while. So Prestige has a lot of stuff in the vaults from that 10-inch era that they're just, repackaging and getting it out there for people. More MJQ. If I remember, this one has a second cover, which I'd like to grab at some point. 7059. 7060, more Gene Ammons All-Stars. And look at that lineup. It's a legitimate all-star with Donald Byrd, Jackie McLean, Art Farmer, Dougie Watkins, Arthur Taylor, and Mal Waldron on the piano. These records are fun. They swing. They're rooted in the blues. They're not rooted in composition. They're not rooted in fanciful arrangement. It's much more just gut bucket, gospel blues, jazz that just swings hard and plays with tons of feeling. And again, I said before, emotion doesn't always need the signposts of arrangement to be most effective. Sometimes the freedom of the blues is the greatest way to narrate your story. This is just a reissue of 7060 with a 70s cover. Not a great cover by any stretch. Mobley's Message. This is Mobley shortly after his exit from Savoy, where he does a couple sessions that he wasn't really a leader on, but they've since become kind of Mobley leader records. And here he moves to Prestige in 55, 56. And he does Mobley's Message, and there's a part 2 to that. And that's with Donald Byrd, Jackie McLean, Barry Harris, Doug Watkins, and Art Taylor. And with McLean and Byrd and Mobley, you got 3 guys that are Jazz Messenger alumni, and Dougie Watkins as well. But of course, they're not on Blue Note. They're not really working with Art Blakey. It's Art Taylor here. But it's still they got a familiarity with each other. And you have a little star by Jackie McLean as a guest. That means he's being borrowed from, I wonder if it's Jubilee or, I don't see what the star is saying. It just says as a guest right there. But yeah, he wasn't obviously a Prestige. Well, he might have been. It depends on when that session was recorded, because he does go to Prestige at this point. Trumpets, Art Farmer and Donald Byrd. And what you have there is 2 middle-of-the-road sound-wise trumpet players. This isn't about ability or skill set. It's just about their sound, their tone, their forcefulness and bluster. Art Farmer is a softer player even than Byrd is. Byrd definitely has a lot of bluster and edge to him at times, but he can also play a much softer, milkier tone at times, depending on the format of what he's playing. Byrd's not Hubbard and Clifford Brown with that brightness and that intense, I want to say warmth, but there's a bright light inside of what a lot of Hubbard and Clifford Brown and guys like Booker Little are doing. And a guy like Donald Byrd, he's a little bit more contemplative. Kenny Dorham's in that same range, I think. The trumpet players are, of all the brass instruments, you can really kind of differentiate trumpet players' tonality a great deal. And some guys have a lot of cloudiness and softness and like I said, almost a milkiness. Other guys are crystal clear and pure. I was listening to some early Miles Davis stuff yesterday. There's a lot of times where he kind of has to bend his way to the note he's looking for. It sounds sloppy at times. This is Gilmel, his first record at Prestige, if I remember. Maybe it's the second. The modern one was first. Again, with Joe Cinderella, the great bass player Vinnie Burke, and Eddie Thigpen's on the drums. Kenny Dorham makes a guest appearance. Art Farmer makes a guest appearance. Hal McCusick. And, of course, the French horn player Julius Watkins shows up. And I think each of them done Butterfield. I think for the most part they are on a track or two. But I love this record. Great cover. Very much a Blue Note Reed Miles type of aesthetic going on there. And, again, Gilmel is kind of a modern player who has some avant-garde edges and minimalism and arranged. His stuff's very arranged and very, I don't want to say rigid, but some of it has kind of a rigidness to it almost. Here's a Garland of Red, a pretty tough Red Garland LP to find. And of course, he's been working with the Miles Davis Quintet at this point for numerous years. And Garland's a great voice. He kind of has this block chord style that McCoy Tyner does somewhat later on. And Garland's kind of one of the guys behind it. Bill Evans kind of does it at times. I'm a huge Red Garland fan. I think he's a very contemplative, emotional player. He's got a softness to him. I love when he's comping and filling on some of that early Miles stuff. He's just a very emotive player that has. I like what he has to say. I found an original copy of that, 7064, with Paul Chambers and Art Taylor. And here's a hint for you guys on these Red Garland records. He does some stuff with like Coltrane and Donald Byrd in a quintet or bigger setting, and that stuff's going to be much fuller and much more in your face than the stuff he does in trio settings. And I love Red Garland's trio settings. It's all very much Sunday morning cafe music. Here's Barbara Lee. She's a singer. I think she sang with the Johnny Windhurst Quintet, so that's what it says there, yeah. And I think she might have been with Claude Thornhill briefly, too, if I remember. Nice singer, fairly forgotten. And this is one of her two records on Prestige 7065. And original presses of this go for pretty good money. And OJC presses that are very, very rare. And I finally tracked one down. I could never find one for him under like $100. I think I got that one for 15 when I finally found it. I was like, yeah, sweet. Dual roll of Bob Brookmeyer with Teddy Charles and Jimmy Rainey, the great guitar player. Brookmeyer's a great bone player. Very much in the Al Cohn, Zoot Sims company of guys. That white modern player who's about composition and the edges of the avant-garde. And Brookmeyer could play in a lot of different formats. And this is definitely material that was from before the LP era. Freddie Red and Hampton Hawes. Again, neither guy is really someone you think of as a Prestige recording artist. Hampton Hawes had a big, long career on the West Coast, working with, the Contemporary label. Freddie Red's kind of a Blue Note Riverside guy, but these are both sides that they recorded pre-LP that they compiled together by the two pianists. Great stuff. Big fan of that record. It's a pretty tough record to find. And it's even called Piano East, Piano West, due to the different coasts that those guys were kind of at home in. Jackie's pal, introducing the great trumpet player Bill Hardman. Hardman's a fantastic modern player. He plays in the fantastic 1957 era Jazz Messengers with Jackie McLean, with Johnny Griffin, Spanky DeBrest. That lineup of the Jazz Messengers is really kind of an overlooked lineup. I've done an episode on that if you want to look for that. Mal Waldron, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. And records like this are going to be post-bop into hard bop, fairly aggressive, fairly edgy. So again, you see how varied the sound at Prestige is continually going to be. And there's the second Moondog record, which is a further exhibition of the bizarreness that Prestige was willing to allow. Moving along now, here's Tad Dameron and John Coltrane, Mating Call.
And Tad Dameron was a great arranger in the bebop era. He was very in demand. He dies way too young, sadly. But here he is working with John Coltrane. And Tad Dameron's a name that's kind of getting forgotten, it feels like, in the modern era. More Billy Taylor, 7071. This is cross section. Actually, kind of a tough record to find. OJC never reissued it, so you don't really see that one very much. James Moody. Another one I don't think OJC issued, so again, you don't see that one very much. But a great moving bluesy session all night long. Fantastic record. It's kind of a leaderless record. I think it's kind of been attributed to Donald Byrd, sometimes Kenny Burrell. But it's really kind of just a session for these guys working together, playing long blues and just kind of long, straight jazz tracks. But great band. Jerome Richardson's fantastic. I've talked about Richardson quite a lot over the years. Mobley's fantastic. Watkins, Taylor, Waldron. It's a pretty all-star group, obviously, all night long. And I've loved this record for years. If I remember, side one is all one track. Indeed. And All Day Long might be the same thing, which comes along in a little bit. There's Tenor Conclave. And if memory serves, this is just a collection of scraps. Although, let me look. Mobley, Cohn, Zoot Sims, Coltrane, saxophone. No, maybe this is a jam session. One of those sessions maybe where those four saxophones were there. They just started jamming out with a rhythm section. And again, you have some fairly different voices there. You know, Cohn and Sims are very much opposite sides of the spectrum versus a guy like Coltrane. And Mobley's going to fit somewhere in the middle there. Here's Thelonious Monk with Sonny Rollins. More of that early 50s Rollins era. That's great material. Again, let me double check on that. This could be... Yeah, it looks like it's early stuff. I think Rollins, for the most part, has departed Prestige by this point, and he's probably working at Blue Note by now, and then going to Riverside shortly after that. Here's Walkin', and again, this is Miles Davis. This is the first Miles Davis record we've seen in a while. He was pretty heavy there for a while in that Prestige early series. Great record. Again, taken from 210 inches. Lucky Thompson's fantastic on this. Horace Silver, J.J. Johnson. And a lot of those guys didn't play together. It was taken from two different sessions. But the Davey Schildkraut track on there is one of my favorites of all time. I'll take that out for now. Kaleidoscope, Sonny Stitt. I just did a big episode on Sonny Stitt. So if you want to know more about this is Sonny Stitt from 51 and 52. Pretty early in his recording career. Not long after he's departed, working with the Eckstein Band. Here's Teddy Charles. Again, a West Coast session with Shorty Rogers, Jimmy Joffrey, Charlie Mingus, and Shelly Manne. So pretty outstanding modern stuff. Teddy Charles has got somewhere between cool with the edges, some edges of the avant-garde in composition and arrangement. So it's a very interesting session. Both of Teddy Charles's records at Prestige are really good. Saxophone Colossus. This is one of the great hallmarks of the Prestige label, 7079, with the fantastic Tommy Flanagan, Doug Watkins, and Max Roach. Just a great record where Rollins is really in his top form. He feels really invested. He's really shining, and so many of the tracks on there are kind of standards of not just Rollins' career, but the jazz canon at this point. Youngbloods, Phil Woods, and Donald Byrd. So you have Byrd on the trumpet with Phil Woods on the alto sax. And again, that's a pretty rare record. I don't think I've ever even seen an original of that one. But OJC did reissue it. Here's All Day Long. And this one's kind of been given credit to Kenny Burrell at this point. But again, it's Donald Byrd, Kenny Burrell, Tommy Flanagan, Doug Watkins, Art Taylor. Frank Foster shows up in this one. It's a great cover. I think that's the bridge that connects Staten Island to Long Island, but I'm not positive on that. Fantastic. Great cover. Great blowing session that's rooted in the blues. Here's Mobley's second record at Prestige. And by this point, he's already probably moved over to Blue Note. This just came out a little bit after he moved there. With Dorham, Bishop, Watkins, Art Taylor. Originals of that go for pretty darn good money. Gene Ammons Funky, 7083. And this has Jackie McLean, Kenny Burrell, Art Farmer, Mal Waldron, Doug Watkins, Art Taylor. So again, a lot of these records you're seeing the same backing musicians, and they're just giving different people leadership roles depending on whose turn it was and who really shone on that session, and whose contract's dictating we issue a leadership role. But it's not like Blue Note where it's just orchestrated, organized. This is what we're going to do for you this time. Here's Thad Jones, 7084. Oleo. I think it's Oleo. Tough record to come by, boy. Originals of this go for thousands of dollars, hundreds for sure. Teddy Charles on the vibes, Frank West playing flute and sax, Thad Jones on the trumpet with Dougie Watkins, Mal Waldron, and Elvin Jones. So this is Elvin Jones before he's with Coltrane. Interesting cover. Again, great hard bop meets the blues. Farmer meets Grice. Grice is one of the great composers and arrangers of this era. And so this will be Grice compositions most likely most of the way through. Farmer's a great lyrical trumpet player with a great deal of empathy in his sound. Some soft, fuzzy clouds. I'm a big Art Farmer fan. If you like Miles Davis, you'll love Art Farmer. Probably even a bit of a cleaner tone when he wants to have it. And definitely Farmer's probably a better player at up-tempo than Miles is too. Of course, Miles on that mute is the legendary Miles there. Red Garland piano. One of the first original Prestiges I ever tracked down. This goes back to probably early 2000s, late 90s. Great album cover with that single monotone color, chromatism. Paul Chambers and Art Taylor. Wonderful record, one of my favorite Prestige records ever, really. Jackie McLean and Company. This is Ray Draper, and I showed you a Ray Draper record in one of my episodes recently about Ray. A guy that spent a lot of time in prison for drugs, was a fantastic tuba player. Not an instrument you hear a lot in jazz, but there he is in the background, Ray Draper. And this is kind of his introduction. He gets a couple records of his own here coming up on Prestige New Jazz. This is Kenny Burrell, 7088, just called Kenny Burrell. Nice little picture of the brother. I'm going to have to look who's on this one, I don't remember. It's got Cecil Payne on the baritone. That's weird. You don't see Cecil Payne on Prestige very often. Tommy Flanagan, Dougie Watkins, and Elvin Jones again. See, Elvin Jones is getting some work here as a sideman at Prestige in the late 50s. Here's Jimmy Rainey, Prestige. It's just called the letter A, which is a strange title, without question. And this has Hal Overton on the piano, a guy that's Savoy. He did some work at Savoy earlier on, and specialty record with it. Art Margan's on the drums and Teddy Kodak's on the bass. So you see, when you see the white guys here, again, it tells you how segregated things kind of still are. They work in different circles, and they do cross over at times, but a guy like Jimmy Rainey makes a record, and it's pretty much white guys backing him, and the black guys make a record, it's pretty much black guys backing him. And it's not always just like, it's not an animosity that's doing it, it's just a familiarity, the circles I've been playing in, the labels I've been recording for, the standpoints of society, all kind of dictated at that point that crossing over wasn't going to be done very often. Mal Waldron, Mal 1, and he only makes one or two records here at the Prestige label, and then they switch him over to the New Jazz imprint, where he makes probably 4 or 5 more. Gigi Grice is on there with Idris Suleiman, Mal Waldron Quintet. That's a great record, great cover. Great cover for Mose Allison here, Backcountry Suite. This is for piano, bass, and drums. Mose Allison was an interesting player. And again, here we have Frank Isola on the drums, Taylor Lafargue on the bass, and Mose Allison on the drums. So what you have is pretty unknown white players backing Mose Allison here, who's a white cat. And again, by this point, Blue Note's not doing any white guys at all. And great album cover, fantastic jazz-looking album cover. You know, Reed Miles kind of aesthetic going on. Interesting. Mose Allison's quite a interesting composer. He has some interesting kind of departures and arrangements going on. I love a lot of Mose Allison's work. It's complex, interesting. He also sings at times. 3 Trumpets, which is a successor to the True Trumpets record we saw a little bit ago, 7092. This is fantastic hard bop. Art Farmer, Donald Byrd, and Idris Suleiman. And Suleiman doesn't get much work as a leader, sadly, but he was a great sideman, fantastic player. Farmer, of course, and Byrd, of course, are very noteworthy. And Byrd and Farmer both do some work at Blue Note. Of course, Bird's there forever. Farmer doesn't get any leadership stuff at Blue Note, but he does do quite a bit of side work with Hank Mobley, Sonny Clark. He shows up quite a bit over there. Billy Taylor trio at Town Hall, 7093. Again, that Reed Miles artistic design is really coming forward at that point. Again, it's going to be a fairly anonymous band here with Billy Taylor. Earl May's on the bass. Well, that's fairly well known. Percy Bryson on the drums with Billy Taylor. Earl May has some name recognition, but he's not a big name for sure. It just shows you how big the jazz community and the jazz canon is, though. 7094, this is Cookin' with the Miles Davis Quintet, which, of course, is part of that 4-album session that they knocked out in 2 days, 2 sessions, 4 records worth of material. This is the sign that Miles has officially departed for Columbia at this point, and Prestige is going to capitalize on that big session, turn into 4 records that they release over the next couple of years, and keep people thinking that Miles is on Prestige when, of course, he's long since departed. A record I had on OGC for no, I didn't have it on OGC. I had a later reissue of this with a different cover, but I finally got a good pressing of the original with the original cover. Sonny Rollins with Kenny Dorham and Max Roach. I love the cover. Of course, it's missing a little chunk there. This record can go for hundreds of dollars. This one has a few unfeelable marks on it, so I actually ended up getting it for a really good price. It took me a while negotiating with that seller. He first had it listed. I made him an offer. He took it down, didn't want to sell. Then I looked again 6 months later maybe, and he still had it back at a different price again. And so I made him another offer, and this time he was happy to take it. Here's one of those Ray Draper records we talked about. Jackie McLean, Mal Waldron, introducing the great player Webster Young, who's kind of a very forgotten about trumpet player. You gotta love that era of Prestige. It's just some really great stuff's happening here. Quadrama, Gilmel Quartet. I think this is his last at Prestige, 7097. Again, very much a Reed Miles inspired cover, and it's possible that even Reed Miles did do a few of these covers. If I remember, Reed Miles does do a few Prestige covers in this period. I could be wrong, but I think he does, and that's as Reed Miles as it gets. Looks like a Jackie McLean album cover. Ray Bryant Trio. This is actually a new jazz version of this, and a lot of new jazz titles got issued in the Prestige 7000 sequence, and conversely so. And you don't always necessarily have to have both versions. I, of course, found the new jazz one for a good price, and I grabbed it. And I've given it both numbers on the cover, even though it's the new jazz title. I think the cover is the same in both instances. Sometimes they actually change the cover. And then 7099 is more Moondog. It's the last Moondog at Prestige. That wraps up his 3-album deal with the Prestige Records. So what a streak of records that is, and what a time it is for jazz overall in general. Riverside's doing great stuff at this point. Blue Note's killing it at this point. And Prestige is killing it too. These 3 New York labels and are just putting out some incredible stuff. Savoy and Atlantic are not as consistent, but they're also adding some great stuff to the canon, especially the canon of black jazz and the hard bop movement that's happening. What's happening on the West Coast is its own scene, a different sound, and we'll cover those labels hopefully later if people watch these series. But there's a definite different sound happening at Pacific and Contemporary and Fantasy in 56, 57. That's very different what's happening on the East Coast on these black labels. And even in Chicago is more bluesy, gospel-driven jazz, less hard bop. Of course, you do have Clifford Brown and Max Roach, but they kind of predate this moment. They're 54, 55 doing that stuff and kind of setting the table for hard bop. But, of course, Clifford's passing kind of puts an end to what he's doing there. But the imprint that he establishes leads to so many players taking a bite off that. You know what I mean? It's just a great moment. Jazz is just in an incredible place here. And jazz, this new generation of kids that's coming up in the mid to late 50s, is a more militant, socially active, aggressive black male. And that's important to grasp. The the generation before was just thankful that they weren't getting lynched and were happy to be playing and selling records and making a living. And they didn't really care if black men or white men were dancing to it. You know, a lot of the segregation was still strong. Jim Crow was, they were happy to be out of the South, living up in the North, having more opportunity. And at least living in Detroit, you still faced racism, but you had a job. And it's easier to take people talking shit when you can pay your bills and feed your kids tonight, you know. And of course, a lot of those great industrial cities, and all end up having huge black neighborhoods, which gave them pockets of their own group, their own people, to really feel comfortable and safer in. And of course, white flight leads to the services being diminished in those neighborhoods. And as the service diminishes, the crimes increase. And as manufacturing gets shifted overseas, the employment fades away. And that's what leads to a lot of these black neighborhoods becoming the urban ghettos that are blighted, and that the perception of American black neighborhoods is today. But it wasn't due to their own doing. It was, a lot of these black neighborhoods initially were really quite urbanly successful, upwardly mobile. There's black schools, black colleges, black businesses, black banks. There was a lot of progress being made in the black community in places like Harlem, in parts of DC, in parts of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Detroit, Chicago, Dayton, Ohio. I mean, it's a real period of optimism for the black community as they're rising up in the 40s, migrating to the north into the 50s. It's a real period of change, and the music's reflecting all of this. A less tolerant, a less willing to just dance and polish your shoe kind of mentality. And it's coming across in leaps and bounds by what these young men have to say. And all the great white jazz that's happening simultaneously, as marvelous as a lot of it is, and it's fantastic, a lot of these guys can play, it doesn't contain that same social anchor, that direction that's so focused. And it's powerful if you can tap into it. If you can grasp that history and grasp that moment they're living in, the feelings that Ellington's bandmates and Basie's men and the great black players of those 30s and 40s, even the early bebop guys, it's a different feeling by now in the 50s. And it's just such a focused thing coming out of New York, especially in this moment. And civil rights is coming to a head. The post-war ignoring of black entitlement. We fought your wars for you. A lot of us, almost every black musician served in the Army or the Navy or the Air. Like it's incredible. There's a lot more white musicians that didn't serve. There's plenty that did in the jazz era, but a lot of white guys didn't serve. Almost all black guys spent some time in the armed forces. And many of them went overseas, and some didn't return. Some of them got to play in bands. Some of them were on the front lines. But they saw a liberated Europe, that they were fighting and risking their lives for, and they were being treated like human beings and being fed in restaurants and being treated like equals. And in some cases, if you were a jazz musician now in France or Belgium or wherever, you were treated like royalty. So to return to America post-war and to still be spat upon and called boy and have the N-word thrown at you, and for opportunities to be drying up and jazz being diminishing on the scene, which like it was in the end of the 40s, early 50s, the big band era came crashing to a halt. Rhythm and blues is starting to rise up. Rock and roll is formulating itself under some of those same principles, and jazz was starting to become an archaic beast. But it was still the language a lot of these guys played and spoke. And so this generation that comes up in the 50s, they're taking an art form that's gasping in some ways, and they're energizing it and charging it with a political, social element that they couldn't have gotten away with pre-war. And by post-war, jazz is such a desperate creature to survive that even a lot of the white labels were like, okay, yeah, we'll record these young black guys, and I hope people don't know what they're trying to get across, because that sure feels aggressive.
And like a guy like Alfred Lion just couldn't get enough of it. He's like, yeah, you got to say what you got to say. Being a Jew from Germany and seeing what Alfred Lion went through, and obviously the treatment of the Jews in Europe, Alfred totally got the black experience in America. And I think even guys like Lubinsky and at Savoy and Bob Weinstock at Prestige had moments of empathy and moments of probably Weinstock more than Lubinsky. Lubinsky seems like a pretty big heel. He wouldn't have got a lot of time as a babyface in the wrestling world. Weinstock would have been the bad guy pretty much his whole career. But Hogan would have body slammed him eventually. I watched some wrestling from my childhood the other day. It kind of made me chuckle how corny it was. But it's just an important era. And when you see it laid out like this, you see what's happening. It is a magical time. And remember, jazz is still dying in most aspects. As a commercial enterprise, jazz has shared the marketplace. 1950 to 1960, it goes from being small to almost invisible. And remember, in 1940, it was the lion's share of the jazz marketplace. In 1930, jazz was the marketplace. Like, it was so omnipresent and such a powerful force. And so to see it by 1960 being such a relegated afterthought in the music industry is part of what allowed a lot of these black men to get these really socially conscious and aggressive and powerful emotive records recorded. And no one really noticed because they weren't popular music anymore. So it allows us as the listener, if we have that ear and that history and that context, we can grasp the civil rights going on in the late 50s and the urban blight happening, the white flight underway, the city services being cut, the lack of policing, school systems, schools being shut down. If there's only black kids left in this neighborhood, we're not going to fund all these schools. We're going to close half of them down. We're going to strip some of the courses away. And the tax base was part of that reasoning because that tax base was disappearing with the white flight. But it was also a convenient way to keep someone who's always been under thumb still under thumb. And as that process happens, the crime increases. As the drugs get dropped in those neighborhoods, drugs become a viable option for employment, sadly, which leads to a lot of incarcerations. The civil rights that was earned, a lot of it was undone by the travesty of the drug war and how that threw a lot of those rights you just earned right out the window. Oh, we smell marijuana, we can bang through your door and arrest everybody and incarcerate people for long sentences. And it only got worse in the 80s with the cocaine and crack epidemic. And again, the lack of opportunity forces a lot of young black youth into making choices that weren't great choices for their life's future, which is a sad state of affairs. If you've ever watched The Wire, you can see how limited a lot of these young black kids' options are. Great television show from the early 2000s talking about Baltimore and the black neighborhoods and the policing. And it's not about a good or a bad guy's story. It's about the truth of what's happening and how everybody is complicit. And the young black youth is as much to blame as the upper levels of city government and management that aren't giving them the opportunity to do anything else. Fantastic show. It'll make you move to tears at times. So anyway, that's, again, watch this series. Prestige is important. We'll jump into the 7100 series on my next episode. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Tell your friends to watch this stuff. Tell your friends to buy Prestige records. Don't just buy Blue Note. Buy Prestige records. And there's also some great t-shirts and hoodies in the merchandise store. So check that out. And support the channel if you can through Patreon. We appreciate every dollar that gets donated. It helps me survive right now. I can't find work as a DJ. Restaurants are kind of on life support from all this COVID stuff. No one wants to pay me to come and entertain people when they're struggling to pay their own bills. You know, I've been looking around. I had a few interviews with places, a few trials, but nothing's really stuck yet. I did make a connection with an event promoter the other day. He's an African-American guy. This could be the one thing I've been looking for. So let's hope and say a prayer for that, because I do need to find a way to get back out in the community and DJ again, because I can bring that gift of music to people, entertain them, make them feel comfortable and safe and entertained. But I can also drop that knowledge and that cultural significance in that music and really kind of drive home some things to both black and white Americans.
A lot of young black kids need to appreciate black music and the importance of it. And then a lot of white Americans need to know that it's more than just, I like Motown. There's a lot more going on in that story. We all be safe. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.